Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Andy, and here we're continuing to talk about Dante's Inferno. Now, at the end of the last video, you were like, oh man, finally we've made it done with the 8th circle, and now it's time for the 9th. Well, first I have to say that this video is the in-between canto. This canto is like the bridge between the 8th and the 9th circles. The 8th circle is about fraud, and the 9th circle is about treachery. And if you think about it, treachery is a kind of fraud, because treachery is being fraudulent about human relationships, if you think real closely about it. So, I'm going to dive in, and we're going to talk about this canto that's very interesting, having to do with language and diversity and all that. That same tongue, referring to Virgil, which at first had cut me so that both my cheeks were reddened by it. Remember that Dante got scolded for listening to that argument of those two people from the 8th circle, also administered the remedy to me. In like manner, I heard it was Achilles and his father's lance, the single instrument of a cruel, then of a kindly gift. We now turned our backs to the joyless valley, high upon the bank that circles it around, saying nothing to each other as we crossed. There it was less than night and less than day, so that I saw only a little way ahead. But I heard the sound of a horn that was so loud it would have made my any thunder feeble. Following the path of that sound in reverse, my eyes were thus directed to its source. After the tragic rout of Charlemagne, when he lost that holy undertaking, even Roland did not blow so powerfully. My head was turned that way but for a while, when I thought I had seen several high towers. I therefore asked, "Master, what city is this?" And he said to me, "Because you have been traveling in the darkness far too long, your imagination has begun to stray. You will see for yourself, if you get there, how our senses are deceived by distance. Give yourself a greater push meanwhile." He then took me gently by the hand and said, "Before we proceed any farther, in order that the fact may seem less strange, know that they are giants and not castles, and that all of them are standing in a well up to their navels around the bank. As when the mist has started to disperse, the vision gradually distinguishes things that the vapor in the air had hidden. So groping through the dark and heavy air and coming closer and closer to the edge, as fast as my error fled, my fear grew. And as Montigione crowns itself with turrets on the wall encircling it, so those horrible giants, whom Jove still menaces from heaven, whenever there is thunder, towered by half their bodies, above the bank that goes around the well. Already I could make out the face of one, his shoulders, chest, much of his stomach, and hanging at his sides both his arms. Nature surely did an excellent thing when she stopped creating monsters of this kind, and so deprived Mars of such executioners. And if she shows no remorse for elephants and whales, whoever studies with this care will hold her wiser and more just on that account. For where the apparatus of the mind allies itself with power and ill will, people are without defense against it. The giant's face seemed as long and broad to me as the pine cone of St. Peter's that is in Rome, and his other bones were in proportion, so that the bank, which served as apron from the middle down, still revealed so much that 3 Phrygians standing on each other could not have boasted to have reached his hair. I estimated it was 30 palm spans, down from the place where people clasped their mantles. Raphael ma almek, zabi almi. The shouting started from that beastly mouth, for which no sweeter psalmody was suited. And my guide said to him, "You imbecile soul, take your horn and use it, if you must relieve your anger or any other passion. Search around your neck, O confused soul, and you will find the rope that holds it fast. The horn lies curved across your massive chest." And then he said to me, "He betrays himself. That is Nimrod, because of whose designs the world does not use one language only. Let us ignore him, and not waste any words, for all languages are as unknown to him as his own language is unknown to others." Having then turned to the left, we covered much more ground, and at a bowshot's distance, we found another even larger and more savage. Who was the master that so entwined him, I cannot say, but both his arms were bound, the right behind him, the other in front, with a chain that wound about him from the neck down, over the part of him that was uncovered, to the 5th time round. This haughty creature desired to test his power against that of mighty Jove, said my guide, for which he was thus rewarded. Named Ephialtes, he made the great attempt when the giants brought fear unto the gods. The arms he once shook, he now never moves. And I to him, "If it is possible, I would like to see with my own eyes the immeasurable Briareus." To which he answered, "You shall see Antaeus, not far from here, who speaks and is unchained. He will bear us to the lowest depths of guilt. The one you want to see is much farther on, and he is bound and made the same as this one, except that he looks even more ferocious. There never was an earthquake that shook a tower more violently than Ephialtes suddenly shook himself. I never in my life was so afraid of death, and fright alone would easily have done it, if I had not already seen his chains." After moving forward somewhat more, we came to Antaeus, of whom 5 ells at least, not counting the head, stuck out from the grotto. "O you who in the fortunate valley that made Scipio an heir of glory, when Hannibal and all his men had turned their backs, once carried off his prey 1,000 lions, and who, if you had taken part in that great war of your brothers, many still to think that the sons of earth would have won it. Put us down there, and have no qualms about it. Where Cocytus is locked up in the cold, would you have us go to Tityus or Typhon? This man can give what you all wish for here. So, bend down now, and stop your sneering. He can still make you famous in the world, for he lives and expects to live much longer, unless called earlier by the grace of God." So said the master, and the other at once stretched out his hands, which once had given Hercules a mighty squeeze, and took my guide when he felt himself being grasped. Virgil said to me, "Come close, that I may hold you," and made a bundle of the 2 of us. As the Carasenda seems, to someone looking up its slanted side, to be falling towards him, when a cloud passes over it, so seemed Antaeus to me as I stood watching him bend forward at that moment, I would have preferred to take another road. But he put us down lightly on the bottom, which devours Lucifer and Judas. Nor did he remain there stooping, but pulled himself up straight, like a ship's mast. Okay, so there's a lot to digest in here. So first of all, let's start from the beginning. So Dante hears a very loud horn, and then he sees in the distance what he thinks are a bunch of towers. And so he asks Virgil, what city are we in? He says, Dante, your imagination is getting all mixed up. It's not towers, it's giants. Think more realistically. Kind of ironic, isn't it? Usually, it's the other way around. Usually you think, like, oh no, it might be giants, but it's just a tower, right? That's more ordinary. But in this case, it's actually the opposite, which is hilarious because, yeah, it's like the fantasy thing is the real thing, and then the thing he thought was real, what you would think would be real, is just a fantasy. So, why are these giants here? Who are they? Well, the first one of the giants is the most significant of all of them, and we're going to be talking a lot more about him. We'll come back after I go through this whole canto. But the first one is from the Bible. His name is Nimrod. And if you recognize his name, you'll know that he is associated with the Tower of Babel in the book of Genesis. So let me turn to Genesis and go ahead and read. Now, in order to get the context, you need to kind of read two different parts. It's close to each other, but I'm not going to read the whole thing, just what I need. So, starting out with Genesis chapter 10 is where it lists Nimrod's name, and the second is about what his deeds were. Genesis 10:8. Cush became the father of Nimrod. He was the first on earth to be a mighty man. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, and Akkad, all of them to the land of Shinar. So he was the ruler of the kingdom of Babel, which, interestingly enough, that I hadn't known this until later on, but Babel is actually the same as Babylon. Like, as you know, the Babylonian exile, you know, the Israelites being taken away, and the story of Nebuchadnezzar persecuting them and all that. Well, this is actually the same city. Super ancient. This is in Genesis, the early part of the Genesis that has a lot of mythical elements in it. Now let me read about the Tower of Babel. Now the whole earth had one language and few words, and as men migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, Come, let us build ourselves a city, and a tower with its top in the heavens. And let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad upon the whole face of the earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, Behold, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore, its name was called Babel, because the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. So it's ironic. These people of Babel, they were saying, let's get together, let's band together, and we need to do this to be unified, right? We don't want to be divided. Well, what happens because of their fruitless efforts? Their language gets confused and they get separated. So the very thing that they thought would be helpful turned out to be the exact opposite. It ended up being to their detriment because they blasphemed God. They said, we can do it on ourselves. We are building this city in our name and not in God's name. We are basically building our way up to the heavens because we are the gods. We don't need this stupid God over there that's the real God, you know? The one who created the universe. We don't need him. And so their languages get confused. And the king was Nimrod, as we have seen from the earlier verse. So what is Nimrod's punishment in hell? Well, pretty fitting. No one speaks his language. Yep, you heard that right. His language, he is literally the only person in the entire universe that speaks his language. How frustrating would that be? You can't communicate with anyone. It's just a hilarious thing that happens, and Virgil's just saying, oh, shut up. Just blow your horn if you want, because your words are just gibberish. No one will ever understand you, Nimrod. And then Dante mentions these other giants. Now, the first giant, Nimrod, we find in Scripture, while the other ones we find in Greek mythology. And in Greek mythology, there's something that was a sort of war that these giants, they were sort of demigod giants that were sons of the earth goddess, the Mother Earth, Gaia. And a bunch of these giants banded together and they were trying to climb Mount Olympus up to Zeus and to overthrow him. But of course, you can't overthrow the gods, so they were thrown down and punished accordingly. Ephialtes, though one of the ones who was climbing Mount Olympus, was killed by Hercules and Apollo, and then Briareus, which is the other more fierce one that Dante wanted to see, but Virgil said he couldn't because he was too far away, was the son of Uranus and Gaia. And he also was in league with Ephialtes to try to overthrow Mount Olympus. So those are those two of the giants, but there's one more giant that actually isn't punished nearly as badly, because he didn't actually get involved in the fighting, but he was still a son of Gaia and Poseidon this time. And he had an epic duel with Hercules. He was like this undefeated champion who was like connected to the earth, you know, Mother Earth, you know, gave him all his power, and so he would never be defeated. But then one day, Hercules fought him and had the bright idea to lift him up in the air. So it's like his little root feet couldn't touch the ground anymore to get his power from his mother. So Hercules was able to kill him as a result. So at the end of the canto, how does Virgil get Antaeus to pick them up and put them on the bottom? Well, he appeals to their same vendetta of the giants to go against the gods. So Virgil says, okay, Antaeus, you and your fellow giants are trapped here now, right? Well, if you let this guy down here, this Dante guy, you know, he's still alive, maybe he could do something to overthrow the gods, you know? He's still alive. He could maybe do something. So go ahead and put us on the ground. And of course, Dante's not going to be able to overthrow the gods or anything like that, but it's enough to convince this stupid giant to be like, okay, I want revenge, so here, I'll put you down there. And so now Dante is on the ninth circle, which will be the topic of the next video. But now, I'd like to talk a bit more about going back to Nimrod and Dante and how this fits in with our world today. You see, the connection between fraud and treachery, I mentioned in the beginning, that treachery is a sort of forgery of relationships. And when the languages got intermixed, it split humanity, it turned humanity into going our own ways and separate. Different cultures formed. And this is a very mysterious thing. No one, of course, knows exactly how this happened, or how we could develop to have different skin colors and different races and all that. We don't know that from Scripture. And now the rest of this is going to be mostly, my opinion, not really necessarily the Catholic teachings, because I don't think the Church has an official teaching on multiculturalism, but I do know that the Church is against socialism and Marxism. That's definitely something true. And so from that standpoint, I'm going to argue that multiculturalism is a really bad thing for our society. And colorblindness is, well, although it's not perfect, it's a lot better than multiculturalism. And I'm pretty angry because on YouTube, I literally could not find any videos that endorse colorblindness. Everything on YouTube that I found was all pro-multiculturalism. And so I listened to them, and I listened to some of their arguments, but I think they're definitely flawed, and they definitely all buy into this critical race theory narrative that we're hearing so much nowadays, and so many people are up in arms about, and rightly so, because multiculturalism promotes racism, even though they say that, oh no, it's the other way around, multiculturalism is good, and colorblindness promotes racism. Well, that's the stupidest thing ever, and so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. Multiculturalism, I would argue, is the new Tower of Babel. If you think about it, they're trying to divide us when they say that certain groups of people are more privileged than others, and that we need to focus on race as the main issue and everything like that. And one thing I'm really shocked about is that even people on the left could acknowledge that what Martin Luther King Jr. was all about, he's supposed to be known as the black activist. He's the one who said that he had a dream that black and white children could play together. A beautiful vision. He had that vision. And he said that we should not be judged by the color of our skin, but by the content of our character. And in today's world, people are saying, well, okay, colorblindness is well-intentioned, but it's wrong and it contributes to racism. Do they realize that they are spitting in the face of what Martin Luther King Jr. said? And I'm not saying that Martin Luther King Jr. was a saint either. I mean, he apparently was having an affair the night he was killed, so that doesn't bode too well for him, but it doesn't change the fact that what he said was very true, and that people should be judged as people and not by their cultural background. And if you think about it, it's a sort of Marxist ideology. They're trying to pit the privileged against the underprivileged and the oppressed versus the oppressor, you know? The white people are supposed to be the oppressor, and then the other races are supposed to be the oppressed, you know? And, I can understand, like, people that were, you know, their ancestors were made into slaves. I mean, that's a very horrible and humiliating thing, and I can see why they would, why people would still be angry about that even today. But it doesn't change the fact that for people who just happen to have white-colored skin, it doesn't mean that we are deep down racist. I mean, think about it. In the Bible, it says that the son should not be condemned based upon his father's sin. To treat people like, even if they're well-intentioned, they deep down have these evil, you know, racist thoughts. That's very unfair and wrong. And if you think about it, from the other point of view, it's not just white people that are being treated wrongly with this multiculturalism, but the minorities themselves are being treated poorly because of this. And what do I mean by that? Things like affirmative action, it's supposed to be like, okay, well, we need to compensate people of the racial minorities because they're not as privileged as, you know, white people. Well, what is that saying about them? It sounds like it's being nice, but actually it's being very racist because it's saying that, okay, you're a racial minority, and therefore you are too stupid to care for yourself. You are not capable of living up to the same standards as white people. You're an inferior person, and therefore the government needs to give you money to compensate for your lack of ability. I mean, think about how insulting that is. Thinking about how racist that really is. No, colorblindness is not racist. Multiculturalism is racist. And this goes all the way back to, like, some of these Enlightenment philosophers, like, for example, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who had this idea of the noble savage, you know? It's the classic story of the white man comes to America and to kill the Indians, you know? And therefore it means that all Indians are good. All Native Americans are perfectly nice people, and all white men who came over, like, all 100% of them are evil. Like, there's no excuse. But really, there were good people and there were bad people on both sides. Be realistic. And Christopher Columbus, it's so unjust how he's being treated nowadays. He is being called out as someone who came over here to kill people. But nothing could be farther from the truth. Christopher Columbus came here for peaceful reasons, and he had peaceful relationships with the people that he met. But his evil men that was with him, you know, the people who were under his command, they mutinied against him, and they held him captive against his will because they actually were evil and racist, and they were the ones who wanted to destroy the land, not Columbus. And so nowadays, people think that it was him who did those evil things, when it was his men who did it, and he wanted no part of it, and as a result, his men mutinied against him. So don't blame Christopher Columbus. And Jean-Jacques Rousseau with his noble savage, I mean, think of these movies that, you know, came out. They're just stupid and stereotypical, like Disney's Pocahontas, you know, it's the classic story how the white men are coming to take over and all that. And then also the movie Avatar, it's the same story told over and over again. The evil humans from the Earth are coming to this alien planet, and they want to disrupt the environment to get the minerals that they want, and the blue aliens that live there, they're perfectly peaceful people, but the evil humans are always evil. It's just this narrative, this Rousseauian narrative that keeps playing around in our culture. It's disgusting, and it's divisive. It's basically, we as a society are by embracing multiculturalism, we are saying the Tower of Babel is us. We need to be the Tower of Babel. See how we're having diversity, you know? We're having all people of different colors and all that, and we're bringing them all together, you know, like just like the Tower of Babel. But it ends up confusing all the languages. Just in our standpoint, it ends up causing racial strife. People are, you know, groups are being pitted against each other. Whereas if we would just stick to colorblindness, and again, colorblindness, you know, it can be taken too far. You shouldn't be saying, okay, well, I won't even acknowledge that someone else has a different race. I mean, that's going a bit too far. What I really mean is that people should be treated as people, and not like, okay, you're a black person, you're a white person. But you are a person, I am a person, and you have your ethnic background, and that's cool, and we can learn from these cool cultural customs. Like, my ancestors are from Germany and Poland, and, you know, we can talk about, oh yeah, like, it's cool how the Polish, you know, are known to be Catholic, and they have special traditions of going to the cemetery on November 2nd. And by the way, my ancestors were not slave owners just because we're white. My great-grandparents who immigrated here. And so they came after slavery. So therefore, I cannot be judged based on the whole slave mentality, even if you think that. But again, yeah, like, our racial differences should be celebrated, but it shouldn't define us. And we should treat other people as people. What is the solution to all this? Well, I would say that it's definitely Christianity, because Jesus called people of all nations. He broke down the barrier between Jew and Gentile, and now everyone who is Christian, it doesn't matter what race or culture you come from, you can be a Christian. And Christ welcomes everyone from all racial backgrounds. And he wants to unify us in himself. One thing also I'd like to say is that I don't believe in using divisive terms in other aspects besides just race. The term traditional marriage, I refuse to acknowledge that there is such a thing as traditional marriage, because I don't think that homosexual marriage is actually marriage. What you would call traditional marriage, I just call marriage, because that's what it is. It's marriage. That's what marriage is. And then the whole thing about the terms homosexual, heterosexual, I do not like using the term heterosexual, because it's like a dichotomy between heterosexual and it implies homosexual. So I like to say that I'm not a heterosexual male, I am a man. That's right. I choose to identify as a man, not a heterosexual man. Okay? Just a man. I guess that's a new one. Pretty original, huh? But yeah, I think getting back to, you know, a charitable attitude, you know, I really see where people are trying to go when they're, you know, thinking about racism and stuff. I know people are trying to make things better with multiculturalism. I'm sure that there's a lot of good intents, but it's just, it ends up buying into what Karl Marx wanted, which was to pit different groups of people against each other. The bourgeoisie versus the proletariat, this group versus that group. We need to stop groupthink, and we need to think unifyingly. We need to think of each other as people, as Christ sees us all as equal. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned next time, where we're going to see the bottom of hell in 4 parts. See you then, and whatever you do, stay out of hell, okay?